So I'm here with Tyler Brunet, a lecturer at the University of Exeter. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you work on?
Right. Well, my name's Tyler. I've been a lecturer here for about a year and a half now. Technically, my post is as a lecturer of the philosophy of science. Before that, I was a postdoc here for a number of years, for 3 years. So I've actually been at Exeter for about 5 years now. A little bit about my sort of disciplinary background, I suppose. I guess I'm kind of two things. The joke about me is that I'm a philosopher of biology on paper, which is to say that I'm not entirely a philosopher of biology. But I say I spend about half my time doing philosophy of biology and the rest of it doing logic and metaphysics. I was trained to do the philosophy of science. I did a PhD in history and philosophy of science at the University of Cambridge. And before that, I was training in biology and biological theory. So I did a master's degree in computational biology and bioinformatics. And basically, I just took philosophy classes and computational biology classes at the same time. And before that, I did an undergraduate in biochemistry and molecular biology and philosophy as a combined honors, because that was something you could do then. Yeah, so that's a bit about my background. I suppose further questions will answer more specific things.
The next question is actually it follows quite nicely. What drew you to philosophy over further studies in science?
Yeah, it's hard to say. One key thing that drew me to philosophy over further studies in science was when you want to be a theoretical scientist, you need to go down a certain path. So you need to go and get your PhD in the sciences, of course, but then postdoc for a number of years, and then possibly manage a lab for a while, and then get a very large grant to manage a large laboratory to do sort of experimental work. And then you spend a lot of your time doing grant writing and supporting the existence of your lab as the principal investigator. And the rest of your time you get to spend doing sort of theory and maybe some practical work in the lab. And in a sense, that's kind of what I wanted for myself, but I really just wanted to do the theory. I just wanted to do the theory bit. So going down the path of becoming a kind of research scientist wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I realized that when I was basically in grad school, doing my master's in computational biology, I realized, well, I really like the theory around this stuff. I like the philosophy of science. I like the theory of biology. But what I don't like is spending my days writing grants or writing computer programs. I can write a computer program, but I wouldn't like to do it as a job. So philosophy gave me an avenue to do that, right? Philosophy, especially history and philosophy of science, like especially that subsection of philosophy, lets you be really heavily engaged with science and scientists, while also not being kind of bound by the same funding and work structures that they're bound by.
So it allows you to think about science and do the things you wanted to do without all of the unnecessary bureaucracy and lab work and compute stuff.
Yeah, at least some less.
Some less. Yeah. I'm sure there's still a lot, but maybe a bit less. So what has been your favorite topic to research? You said you do both the philosophy of biology and you do a bit of metaphysics and modal logic. What particularly has been like, wow, I love learning about this?
I really think it's kind of split. So in logic, it's been modal logic and category theory. So anything in the domain of the relationship between modal logic and category theory is something that I've just been kind of eating up for the last few years. I can't tell you why exactly. I think category theory amongst philosophers, amongst a sort of small group of philosophers, is sort of in vogue. And so in a sense, I was just sort of taking up a fad. But I find it really interesting. And I especially find modal logic interesting. So I like to kind of work somewhere in the middle of those two things. But that's kind of just half my life, right? The other half is spent still thinking about evolution and molecular biology. So I guess my favorite topic there is thinking about things around neutrality and complexity. So, I mean, I think you've read and we'll discuss one of the papers on neutrality and complexity, but I still think about that stuff quite often. I intend to continue to do work on it for a long time. I think it's a huge area and very interesting. Yeah, especially, especially because I think people's kind of biased perception of what evolutionary theory does is it tells us why things are fit, why they're good, why they're the best thing to do some particular job. But when I look at organisms, I don't see them that way. They're often not the best thing to do the job. Their traits aren't the most fit. And they're still extremely complex and interesting nonetheless. So I like to think about them that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually would have continued into further questions than that, but I guess I'll save it for when we get to the second section on that. I'd just like to ask, when we spoke last time, you mentioned 2 aspirations for future books. One on the philosophy of biology, and that was particularly on function, I think I was right, and one on modal logic semantics. Could you elaborate on a bit of those ideas, and also maybe we should explain what modal logic is to someone who might not know about it first?
Sure, I'll start with the biology one first this time. So it's not quite on function. I want to write it on... How do I put this? What I want to write, well, I guess commonly people would call that function. What I want to write on is non-Darwinian forms of evolution. So to me, a Darwinian form of evolution is one where you have traits that are varying in a population, and those traits vary in the fitness effects that they have, and organisms that have the traits that have higher fitness effects that increase your chances of reproduction more, those organisms pass on more of their offspring, more of those traits to their offspring. That's a kind of standard analysis of what natural selection is. But a lot of change in the biological world just doesn't happen like that. So some of it is like the work I've done on neutral evolution, showing that sometimes complexity can just increase and change kind of at random. Sometimes there's special processes that seem to increase complexity even though they don't increase adaptiveness. And I want to write a kind of survey of those. Like I want to write like a compendium that would gather together all, as far as I know, of the different kinds of evolution that just don't work like Darwin said they do. Now that might lead you to the impression that I'm somehow extremely critical of Darwin or Darwinian thinking, but I'm not. I think it's excellent. You know, Darwinism is sort of the best way to think about organisms usually. It's just that there are a lot of cases where it isn't, right? There's a lot of cases where Darwinism leads us astray, and kind of classic evolutionary thinking leads us to believing things about organisms and evolving systems that we shouldn't believe about them. So that's that. I don't know when I'll do that. I've sort of got lots of different projects to kind of piece together into this eventually. Now, I should say something about what modal logic is. How do you say what modal logic is?
I'm only just learning it, to be honest.
Well, I mean, you start with the idea of a propositional logic, or classical logic. And if you know what classical logic is, then modal logic is quite simple. You simply add in these new symbols, and the symbols are called modals, or modal operators. And they work kind of like connectives. Usually the first ones you see when you start out doing modal logic are the square and the diamond, or the box and the diamond. The box usually being read as necessarily, and the diamond as possibly. That's just kind of how we read them. They don't always need to mean that. So then modal logic is the business of trying to work out how these operators should work. What kind of axioms should these operators satisfy? Which kinds of formulas should we believe are true for working with some particular purpose? So here's a kind of obvious one. Suppose the square means it's obligatory that. It's obligatory that. So the sentence square phi would be, it's obligatory that phi. Well, however obligatory works, it should never be obligatory for you to bring about a contradiction. It shouldn't be, because you can't do that. And if you go with standard Kantian reasoning, ought is supposed to imply can. So if it ought to be the case that phi, then it should be the case that phi is possible. Right. So that means that all sentences of the form, it ought to be the case that some contradiction ought to be false. But what about the other case? Can you be obligated to bring about a logical truth? The classic example, which I don't know where it comes from, but I take it from Peter Scotch, who taught me logic, was if I receive a letter, say from an ex-lover, I either burn the letter or I don't. Logically speaking, it's just a logical truth that either I burn the letter or I don't. Could I be obligated to either burn the letter or not burn it?
No, I wouldn't say. Yeah.
It seems like you can't be obligated to bring about a logical truth either. So this is just kind of a taste, right? Like modal logicians are interested in the general phenomena of which kind of axioms using modal operators we should use for different purposes. And I think that what I want to do with this is develop kind of very general semantic framework to work with these things. A very general way of saying, what do modal sentences mean? There are plenty of those that exist already. Some are called Kripke semantics. We also have neighborhood semantics, and even more general than that, we have a thing called co-algebraic semantics and algebraic semantics. So there's lots of things out there that serve that role, and I kind of want to write something that'll unify them.
So bring them all together. Do they contradict each other at all, or are they just tackling separate different operators?
No, they don't contradict each other. It's sort of like they're generalizations of each other.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Like if you were to be lucky enough to get a class on modal logic at university in, say, undergrad or grad school,
that would be
then
nice.
you'd probably learn Kripke semantics, which is based on accessibility relationships between worlds. Sort of what I called intermediate possible world semantics in our metaphysics lectures. And then after that, you might learn neighborhood semantics on your own. And then after that, or if you were in computer science, you might learn co-algebraic semantics. And that's kind of a generalization. And I think there's something that's even more general than that. And so I've been working on that for the last year or so, trying to put it together. I think about it as kind of like my whale, like Ahab's whale or whatever, like a really big problem that would require quite a lot of work for me to do. But if it could be done, and I suspect that it can be done, then it would be quite a big payoff.
It would be a big payoff. That would be a big, big thing. Yeah. You could call it the Brunet semantics.
No, you can never do that. No, you can't. But somebody else could.
Someone could.
If I die.
Someone could.
Hopefully it'll have its own name before I die, though. So hopefully it won't be called that.
Do you see that happening in you said long term. How long term are we talking? It's a big thing.
The next 5 or 10 years.
5 to 10 years. That's not too long term. Still young.
Yeah, I suppose.
There's a lot of philosophers who don't get their big payoff till they're about 75, you know.
Sure, that's true. You do get better and better at philosophy over time. So I'm sure I'll be better at it in my 40s than I am now.
Maybe when you're 70, you'll generalize your own generalization and make you better.
Maybe. I'm reminded of a story, which I think is a conversation between Elaine Landry and Saunders MacLean, where they're both at a conference about category theory. And Elaine sits down and looks over, and Saunders, who invented category theory, says, I invented this, and I don't know what any of it is. So that can also happen as you get older too, right? The things you've done can get away from you, and you can't understand.
And even worse than that, you could end up like what Bertrand Russell did to Frege, where he kind of just, in the principles of mathematics, just kind of brushed aside everything he did.
That's because Frege chose an absolutely terrible way to express himself.
I guess maybe that's why that's how we should focus on our philosophy, is to make sure that doesn't happen. You know?
Whatever you do, whatever logic you do in life, just don't do what Frege did.
Yeah, I can't lie, that would be a bit depressing for that to happen. It would be. What did he do wrong, actually? Now I'm curious, and I'm sure you know more than me. I know the general story.
Sure, it's just entirely his notation. I mean, if you look at Frege's notation, it's hideous. I can read it, but barely. It takes a long time to read it. Whereas Russell's notation is, it looks more algebraic, it's cleaner, it's simpler, it's easy to read. So it's just hideous. It's impossible to read.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest focuses on analytic philosophy. For like those who don't know, a lot of people disagree with it, but they're sort of seen as a division in philosophy between Western analytic philosophy, which I would think is Britain, USA, Canada, and Australia mainly, and then continental philosophy. And with analytic philosophy, one of the main priorities is clarity. And I was going to ask a bit about what you thought on that definition, because I've heard different opinions from different lecturers, some completely saying opposites to each other. So I was wondering what you think.
Yeah, I was just reading about this recently, so probably my views are biased by what I was recently reading. I think there's an historical difference between what we call continental and analytic philosophy in terms of traditions. They kind of both take Kant as their kind of the point of contact. Like continental and analytic philosophy split somewhere after Kant. And so there's a kind of lineage-based definition that tells you why they're different. Like, if you're doing analytic philosophy, you're more likely to have a joke at Frege's expense and talk about Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein, and think about American pragmatists, than you are to make a joke at Hegel's expense, or to talk about Hegel or Schopenhauer or Nietzsche. So there's kind of an historical difference. There does seem to be somewhat of a difference in standard and kind of norms. So I'd say that probably the best way to characterize it is not in terms of clarity itself, but in terms of what each group counts as being clear. Like, to me, dense papers on formal logic can be perfectly clear. You know, it might take 2 days to read them. They're hard to read, but they're clear. And reading Schopenhauer might not feel very clear to me. I don't think that's actually particularly true. Schopenhauer's a good writer. Yeah. But someone in the continental tradition might think that the density of logical formalism makes something unclear, difficult. And so there's kind of just different standards for what people count as clarity. I'm sort of an analytic philosopher, and I'm a little bit biased in that I think analytic philosophers at least have something on their side that continental philosophy doesn't always have, which is that analytic philosophy is much more grounded in argumentation and the notion of validity. So a critique of a paper in analytic philosophy might be that its argument is invalid, if the argument is invalid. But often continental ideas aren't expressed using arguments that could be assessed for their validity in the same way. That's not always true. These are not universal distinctions between these things, but it's sometimes evident that continental philosophers go for something more like the richness of the expression and the convincingness of the rhetoric of what they're doing, probably because of the topics they're interested in. And analytic philosophers tend to focus more on narrow features of the argument structure, its validity, whether the argument's sound. So that's roughly the distinction.
I mean, it was you who told me when I was with my friends after our metaphysics lecture. So Tyler's my lecturer, and he was doing I'm an undergraduate still. He's doing our metaphysics class, and I was with my friends. We were asking about our essay, and you told me that when you see a more narrow topic on the essays, you get happy, and you're like, "That's good analytic philosophy." And the more general, you go, bad analytic philosophy."
So that's sort of, I mean, maybe that's worth dwelling on. What do I want to say here?
I mean, you only have 2,000 words. I can't imagine you could revolutionize metaphysics in that.
I think the biggest mistake that young philosophers make is trying to do too much. Like, none of the professional philosophers who will be teaching you and exist around you currently try to do these like massive things in a short period of time. Like I said, we take long periods of time to do big tasks. And we only expect very small interventions from small tasks. And a small task really is like a 10 to 15 to 30,000 word paper, right? So a 2,000 word paper is something you can hardly accomplish anything in at all, right? You really need to pick up the smallest, narrowest, most bite-sized problem and then really go into detail about them. I think people will find that if they pick a really small problem, they'll realize actually it's really hard to answer a really specific question.
It is. I'm learning that too.
So if you do that, you show much better how good you are at doing it. Right? Whereas speaking in vagaries or generalizations about some large topic, well, you might demonstrate broad knowledge, but not the kind of specific analytic skills that we want to see.
I mean, I'm definitely learning that myself. With the current essay I'm writing, I'm not the topic of the interview, but I'm focusing on a very small, specific part of Strawson's theory of the self and expanding it just this much. And I had a friend say, "Oh, how is that going to take you 3,000 words?" And I'm like, I wish I had 6,000 after doing it. Once you actually really get into the nitty gritty of the argument, you realize how rigorous it all is and actually how hard it is to say, well, I feel like you're wrong, but can I really explain why you're wrong? It's a challenge. I mean, I've been...
And to be able to explain why you think something is wrong in such a way that when someone else reads it, they can understand, right? So you have to be able to define the relevant terms, to give the relevant background, and all that stuff eats up a lot of your space. I mean, what advice would you give to anyone watching this who might want to pursue a career in academic philosophy or take philosophy further at all? Boy, that's an extremely general question.
It's a general question. Let's talk more specifically about doing philosophy. Less so the more,
well, I mean, you have to kind of love it. Mm-hmm. You have to really like it. You have to really want to do it. And so there's that. I mean, if you really like it, if you're really willing to spend the time reading, if it's the kind of thing that you might want to read in your spare time or consume content about in your spare time, then you're probably on the right track. Mm-hmm. Right. The next thing is sort of read widely at first. Try to learn about a lot of different areas of philosophy, not just like one. Or not just like the stuff that you find the most interesting at first. Try to also broaden your horizons pretty quick, because it's often by taking and synthesizing bits from different areas of philosophy that you make progress.
Yeah.
Right? You make progress by being kind of synthetic. So if you're just looking to like impress your lecturers, then a good way to do that is by taking some kind of part of philosophy that you know really well and showing how you can apply it or use it within the course material that you're being given. And to do that, you need to really want to read outside your areas of comfort. So be a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, always never be afraid to be uncomfortable. I mean, what would you say to I've seen this a wide array of people online who think philosophy is a dead discipline. They talk about philosophy, they talk about Hume and Descartes, obviously these massive figures, as if they were the last people to actually do anything with it. And maybe a little bit about the postmodern era. What would you say to those people who think that philosophy is dead?
Well, I mean, they should just spend time in a context where they see what philosophy actually is today. I mean, if you are under the impression that philosophy stopped with Descartes or Schopenhauer or, I don't know,
Sartre
or something, then you're living under a delusion.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
You have a delusional perspective about what the discipline is because you don't see what its day-to-day is.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, that's probably a bit unavoidable for some people because universities are corporate entities. And so to get access to people who are professional philosophers day to day, you can't simply go consult your local metaphysician when you have a metaphysics problem. I mean, you can consult your local metaphysician because you're enrolled in an educational program. Yeah. Right? And so a lot of people maybe who have that perspective don't really realize that a lot of modern disciplines are still quite alive and well.
Very much so, yeah.
And a lot of it, unfortunately, has just become more technical and difficult to understand.
And more narrow and more focused than it was then. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, if you just think that mathematics consists of doing the calculus and extracting square roots, well, we could extract square roots in ancient Babylon. Yeah. And we could do the calculus since Newton.
Exactly.
Right? So did mathematics die then? No, it's just that the progress, the development in mathematics today is happening at a level of sophistication that's beyond what you could generally understand if you weren't exposed to a lot of the more modern material. And it's the same with philosophy. Like, what counts as progress in philosophy today probably wouldn't sound like very much to someone who's only read a bit of Descartes or who's only seen a little bit of philosophy. You wouldn't maybe even recognize it as philosophy. But that's because disciplines grow and change. And so it's still growing and changing.
How do you think it's changed, and how do you feel about it?
How do I think philosophy has changed?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this sort of goes back to the analytic continental divide. One kind of big change that's mattered a lot for people like me in the analytic tradition is what's called a linguistic turn. So philosophers now spend a lot of their time working on the relationship between their language and what they want to do with that language. So in metaphysics, we often spend a lot of time talking about the nature of certain types of sentences. And it's quite similar kind of to what's going on in linguistics. I mean, linguistics is mostly interested, well, I shouldn't say mostly, but is often largely interested in issues of classification and explanation. So linguists will be trying to classify different linguistic forms and say how they relate to each other, codify them, and explain and understand the systems of grammar that other languages use. Philosophers are actually still interested in the world. Like, we're still interested in the nature of the universe, or the nature of concepts, or the nature of modality. But we often do that using the tools of our language while being very kind of reflexively self-conscious of what the tools of our language are capable of doing. So that's pretty important and different, right? It might be the case that ancient philosophers reflect momentarily on their language. The philosophers have always thought about language, but it's to a much more significant extent.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Do you think that being in academia changes how you think philosophically? Do you think it's changed the tone or style or how ambitious your ideas might be compared to when you were just studying and learning? So obviously, I mean, one thing I've heard from people is about like peer review. And I spoke to a lecturer who told me about his concerns of AI usage in peer review and changing the ideas that came from more. It's a big conversation, but a lot of people have gripes with it. I'll keep it at that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so the academy forces you to exist within certain constraints. If you want to be employed within the academy or you want to engage with it, whether at like the master's level when you start writing papers and submitting them and going through peer review, or earlier sometimes, or beyond that at the PhD level or beyond that, you're forced to exist within a certain set of constraints. One of those constraints is peer review, and it can be extremely frustrating. You can write a paper which you think is excellent, and you can get back 2 reviews, one of which says, this paper is excellent, it makes exactly the right contribution to literature, it's good, and it should be published. And the next one will say, this paper is terrible, it's trash, it's awful, it should never have been published, and also why didn't it cite these 25 things? And then you get that after waiting for 6 months, right? It's not like submitting an essay. You don't get feedback in 2 weeks. You get feedback 6 months later, sometimes longer. And then you have a certain amount of time to either fix that up and try again or take it somewhere else. And that can be another 6 months. So sometimes it's been a year or so or more or 2.
It's a long process.
Since you've written something since you're really passionate about it. And it's still in a process of review or change. Sometimes it's lucky, sometimes 1 year you sit down and you think, I've got this bright idea, I'm gonna write a paper about it. You write a paper about it, it gets reviewed. The reviews are very helpful. You change some things and you get a paper published. For a lot of us who work in the academy, we've gone through that process so many times, and that's one of the reasons we're able to be employed, right? Because we have written a lot of papers and we've published a lot of things. And so that means that for everyone that you've seen that we've succeeded at, probably 4 that we failed at, right? Or more sometimes. So it can be quite frustrating, but it's also intended to be valuable and to serve a kind of role for us. So the role is that when I look for papers, I don't find a bunch of bad ones. Now, it's pretty good at filtering out bad things. Is it always good at only letting through the good things? No. It's a little bit too strong for that. But it does mean that we're not floating in a sea of manifestos.
Manifestos, Right. So how do you think this will be the last question before we move on to the next section, but we'll take a quick break.
Sure.
How do you think your ambitions have changed since starting out as an undergraduate and thinking maybe I should do philosophy towards now? And this is a general question, I apologize, but I'm interested. If you had to give your biggest aspiration for your academic career or your philosophical career, what would that be? Whether it be a book, whether it be a certain metric, whatever it is.
Change and ambition. How did my ambitions changed? Well, it's hard to say. I want to say not much. Like I said, kind of answering the question, what does it take to do philosophy? Well, it takes a lot of personal sacrifice and a lot of effort, right? You need to write all those papers and get them rejected. You need to write grant applications and get them rejected. And then eventually get them. You need to write job applications and get them rejected and get another one, right? And so once you've gone through all that stuff, once you know that you're kind of going through all that stuff, especially by the time you get to the PhD, you kind of know what you want to do. You want to do this. I don't know what I would do if I didn't do this. I have other skills, I'm sure. I could use them, but this is what I really want to do with my life. And it's kind of what I wanted to do with my life since finishing the master's degree. Once I finished the master's degree, I kind of knew, I'm going to go do a PhD and I want to stay in academic philosophy. And so my ambitions have changed in the sense that I've achieved the initial goals. Like I've achieved the goal of being a lecturer for the last little while, achieved the goal of being a postdoc. Once those things are set aside, you just set your sights on the next thing. Right? So I think the next thing for me, like my kind of biggest goal in the next, say, 5 or 10 years, would probably be writing a book or two. I mean, I think more in terms of articles. I think in terms of smaller chunks of work. So what I'll probably do is write several papers over the next 5 or 10 years and then kind of try to produce at least one work, major work, in both of the areas where I like to spend my intellectual time, like both in modal logic and in biological theory.
Do you have any specific inspirations or people who like sort of inspired you? Any lecturers you've had or any philosophers you've read, you were like, I want to write work like this guy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose there's a difference between your heroes and who your inspirations are.
Yeah, I mean, you could answer both. Yeah.
Like the people that I look to for inspiration are mathematicians like Saunders MacLean, and some logicians as well. I really quite like Nietzsche and I like Kripke. And I like Russell. Let me see if I can have a look at my shelf. Who else do I take inspiration from? So there's lots of people like that, but none of them are people in my personal life.
No.
So they're not really like inspirations for me. One person who's kind of an inspiration for me, who's just quite helpful, was the person who was initially my symbolic logic teacher, Peter Scotch.
Yeah.
He was just an extremely friendly and kind and helpful person and did a lot. I could tell he did a lot of extra work to help his students do better, even though there wasn't too many formal options for them to learn more logic. He ran extra seminars on logic for us, and he ran extra seminars on Nietzsche for us. So I would say he was kind of like he was at least a mentor figure.
Yeah.
Probably also mentioned Ford Doolittle. So
yeah.
Just for some background, Ford Doolittle is a sort of scientist turned philosopher in his later life. He is largely famous for working on theories of molecular evolution, and that's what I sort of did for the early part of my career doing philosophy of biology. He really had a profound influence on my career and was extremely supportive throughout it. He was the reason that I did a master's degree. He was my undergraduate supervisor and my master's supervisor. And throughout my life, I've written a couple of papers together with him, and he's been just extremely supportive the entire time. My career would not have been what it is without him. And you often need people like that in the academy as you move up, right? You need people to write letters for you. You need people to collaborate with you, even though they're more senior than you, etc. And for me, that was Ford.
Yeah. Okay, that's amazing. I mean, so how important do you think that is to build those mentorships with your lecturers? I mean, kind of what I'm doing right now, talking to you, right? Going out your way for people who are studying philosophy right now, instead of just, doing the reading at home, making use of the office hours and engaging with the lecturers.
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff's very important. I suppose I would just add that it doesn't need to be somebody who's your lecturer. It just needs, you just need to find people in the academy who are sometimes just slightly more senior than you and sometimes a lot more senior than you to kind of support you in various ways, right? Like you need people to write letters for you to get into your PhD programs. And it helps when those people are already famous people. Unfortunately, this means that often famous people get requested to write a lot of letters for people they don't know. So what you should do is just find people that are kind of most relevant for you and most close to you in your environment. Who are the people that are like most relevant to the kind of work you want to do? And how can you be involved in more things that they do? Go to their reading groups, see if they organize any extra events, and try to go to those things. But it doesn't need to be someone who's your lecturer. It can just be kind of anyone in your local academic environment.
Okay, perfect. All right. So we're going to move on to the second part on the philosophy of science. We're going to discuss a bit more closely on what Tyler researches. So probably be a bit more dense, but a lot of interesting conversations to have.
I hope I can remember it all.
Yeah, we'll do our best. I just have a couple general questions before we get into your papers. I was like, just something I was curious in. Do you think that in the philosophy of science, its role, should it aim to clarify science or critique it or something else?
Yeah, I think it's both.
Yeah.
Right? So there's just like there's disciplines of philosophy, there's metaphysics, there's epistemology, there's ethics. There's different ways to be a philosopher of science. You can be a kind of ethicist of science. When you do that in biology, you generally get called bioethicist. But you can also do the metaphysics of science, the epistemology of science. And depending on which of those things you're doing, your role will either be kind of supporting and clarifying scientific theory. That's a role that's sometimes called being an underlaborer of the sciences, and people either like or dislike that label, but it's kind of like that. And sometimes it's critiquing science. Sometimes, scientists are theorists, and so they put out theories and they make philosophical claims and arguments. And sometimes philosophers are kind of pretty well suited to come in and critique those. So yeah, it can happen both ways, right? It can be a clarifying exercise or a critiquing exercise, especially in the ethics of science and the epistemology of science. It's often a sort of critical exercise rather than sort of supporting what scientists are doing. The idea is to sort of engage with them as the subject of one's critique. But it's not always that.
I mean, that follows perfectly into the next question I have, which is going to bring up a quote which you don't like, from Richard Feynman, saying that the philosophy of science is about as useful to scientists as ornithology is to birds. I've spoken to a couple people about this. Someone who I'm not sure if they want me to say their name is saying this, but they told me that they feel like a lot of physicists in particular and scientists do bad philosophy and then think that they don't need philosophers because they actually do need them, or something along those lines. Like a lot of metaphysical assumptions, a lot of bad epistemology, a lot of bad philosophy of language, all those things.
Yeah, so my favorite response to the ornithology comment is to just point out that ornithology is actually quite useful to birds due to bird conservation requiring very important results in ornithology. So that's just sort of a cheeky response to it. But yeah, I think, and I don't want to be too harsh on the physicists here, but physicists, especially the ones that are somewhat theoretically inclined, tend to believe they have a kind of intellectual autonomy that they don't. Right? They just don't have it. So they'll say, familiarize themselves with various parts of many worlds theory and quantum mechanics, and then think that they don't need to have any modal metaphysics in the background, or think that they don't in fact have any in the background, that they're just on the cutting edge, making highly conceptual points about the nature of possibility and necessity. But they're not really accounting for hundreds of years of work on the nature
it sounds like philosophy
that happened before them, right? So physicists are, I hate to say this, but they're especially guilty of this. They often act like they don't need philosophy when they do. And maybe they don't need very much philosophy, right? Like sometimes they don't need very much, but they do need a little bit more. On the other hand, sometimes you meet scientists who, I shouldn't say this as a philosopher of science, but you meet them and you think, wow, you don't need philosophers at all. You're doing great. Just on your own, you're doing fine. Some really conceptually minded scientists often do. One, they may simply just read philosophy. So they get their philosophy secondhand. They don't need to have one in the lab. But sometimes they do achieve a kind of really rigorous conceptual autonomy. So it's possible. It just isn't always true. I feel like I missed some part of your question. Could you?
Well, I was just mainly, I think it covered it, but I did ask, I didn't actually ask my question. That's probably because you read it over. I was saying, as a lot of people argue that philosophy is a bit parasitic on science, do you think that science can be philosophically naive without consequence? That was the last part of that.
Can it be philosophically naive without consequence? Well, I would say sometimes philosophy of science is parasitic on science in the sense that what we're doing, we're often not doing new science, right? Sometimes philosophers of science are legitimately involved in scientific projects. I've been a philosopher of science involved in some projects like that, where there's legitimate data gathering that happens. A lot of philosophers of science are involved in a sort of advisory or consulting capacity with scientists. And in those ways, it's not really parasitic, right? They're genuinely contributing to scientific goals. But sometimes it is. Right. Sometimes it's the case that it's parasitic on science. So I think the answer there is it's diverse. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. I don't know if it's really a problem when it is. I mean, philosophy of art is probably parasitic on art. People need to do art without thinking about the philosophy of it for philosophers of art to have something to do. And people need to do science, sometimes rashly and naively, conceptually badly, in order for philosophers to have something to do and to come in and be of service somehow. So I don't know if it's a problem, but sometimes it is like that.
This is actually not on my list, but now I'm just curious. When did the notion of the philosophy of science come about? When did this become a discipline? Because obviously at some point science was just philosophy, and at some point in the 18th and 19th century we started separating physics from natural philosophy, and your colloquium had a whole talk on that. And I was wondering when the notion of philosophy of science became a thing, and if it's still really about science at all, or if it's a bit more of a meta-philosophy.
I'm not enough of an historian to give you the best answer to that question. I would say philosophy of science as an academic discipline crystallized, emerged sometime in the 20th century. Early 20th century, philosophy of science became a kind of program of work that one could work in. But as you pointed out, there's lots of earlier cases where people are sort of both a natural philosopher and a sort of scientist, a scientist. So I would say it's sort of vague going back. There's probably a better disciplinary question, a historical question there, but you'd have to talk to an historian of science. Actually, you'd want to talk to someone who's an historian of the philosophy of science, or a person who does hopos.
Well, there is someone in the department who does that, so maybe that'd be an interesting conversation to have. I was just wondering, actually, I may have lost my train of thought. I'll ask my next question, see if it comes back. It's like, what is your opinion on scientism, and what impact does it have on the future of philosophy?
What's scientism?
It's a good question. Scientism, the notion I've seen mainly online, is the idea that everything can be solved via scientific data, and that we don't need philosophers anymore because we can just look to empirical values to solve the problems. That's the notion I've got from reading.
Yeah, I just don't see how science can answer certain types of questions.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
So science can't really answer questions of value. For instance, science can tell you this vaccine is very likely to immunize you against this disease. But it can't tell you things like, and therefore one ought to take this vaccine.
Yeah.
It can tell you something like, this birth defect is very likely to have a negative effect on the life of your child. But what it can't do is tell you how you ought to think or feel about that.
It can just give you the data to say what will happen.
Yeah, it can just give you data. Questions of value, normative questions, are just sort of beyond what science can do. And that's for good reason. No amount of data can convince you or should convince you of a normative claim. Suppose everyone in your society thinks that X is wrong. Does it follow that X is wrong?
Maybe.
No. I mean, it doesn't follow. It might be wrong or it might be right.
It depends
Plenty
on
of
the different
times,
factor.
people exist in societies that have some norm, and that doesn't make the norm the right one.
And eventually gets cancelled out when we start thinking about it more and more.
Something else, right? Like at one point, everyone believed that public execution was completely fine and good.
It's okay. It's how we've done it forever.
Yeah, so right. So if you did statistics on it and you tried to like do a survey and you tried to do science on it, you'd probably conclude, it's a good thing. But that's what science can't do. It can't tell you what your norms ought to be. It can tell you what sociology, for instance, can tell you what the norms are. Quantitative sociology can go out and tell you what are people's norms in this environment. But it can't tell you that they should have.
Yeah, should they keep those values or not? That's a question which can't be answered from the data alone.
Yeah, and I mean, a similar problem is other normative things in philosophy, like argumentation, logic. These are normative disciplines as well. Yeah, right? They're just not normative about sort of emotional value things. They're normative about the structure of reason. No science can't tell you what makes a valid argument.
No.
Science can't ground induction.
No.
Right. Science can't do those kinds of things. And it shouldn't, right? You shouldn't try to use science to do those sorts of things. So there's at least some cases in which, you shouldn't be using science to do that. And you should probably be using science to gain empirical evidence about the things you want to reason about. And you should be using science to gain empirical evidence about the things that you want to have value judgments about. But you can't use science to answer those questions.
Yeah, and I think even in research, it kind of happens. I mean, consider the fact that a lot of scientists critique other scientists by saying their work wasn't real science or bad science. The fact that there's a notion of bad science means someone needs to define and say, what's good science, right? Can't do that with just the data alone.
Yeah, we can't do... there are people who do what's called scientiometrics, where they try to do science on science.
Yeah, it's a science about science, but that's not what the philosophy of science is. Yeah, how would you separate that? Because I think people might misinterpret it as that kind of thing, a science about science, but it's not a science.
Well, scientiometrics is a discipline that deals with sort of statistical properties of science. It'll be able to tell you things like, in physics papers, the number of authors is a lot higher. Or this is the gender bias distribution in publications within chemistry, or things like that. Right? So it'll be able to tell you sort of statistical facts about the nature of science. Philosophy is not really interested in those things as much. I mean, we might be interested in them sociologically. We might want to know, say, feminist philosopher of science might want to know, how is, gender-biased research actually taken up?
Yeah.
Is there a significant difference in how gender biases influence the way people uptake scientific research? Yeah, that's going to be a philosophy question.
Yeah.
Right? But philosophers of science are interested in the norms again, right? We're interested in normative judgments about science that people who are just doing a kind of like science of science wouldn't necessarily be interested in.
No. All right. Well, I mean, another question I had, which came back to me now, was before we move on to your paper, was another one of our lecturers here who's a philosopher of mind. He was talking about the division of disciplines, how philosophy is now situated as a humanities, but he didn't see it as either a humanities, an art, or a science, but as something that transcends it. And I wanted to know your opinion, because I can imagine, as I've spoken to many people about this, and I think it was Lucy gave an example. She spoke about her PhD, which was on the philosophy of mind, and someone said, "So you're doing psychology?" We're not, right? That's the thing. So what would your response to those kind of things be?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I have a good friend of mine seems to believe that philosophy is a social science. That seems to be because his department where he was raised, I should say grown, I don't know, was a social science department.
Right.
And where you do philosophy, you're in the Department of Social and Political Sciences, philosophy.
Technically, yeah.
And anthropology. So you're in a sort of social science or humanities context. I would say I tend to group philosophy with the humanities. Like, it's like sociology and it's like anthropology in that it's often concerned with normative elements of human life. Right? But topically, it can be quite different, right? So there's corners of philosophy that are a lot more like math.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah.
And then there's corners of philosophy that are a lot more like art. So maybe I would just say that sometimes it kind of spans that divide a little bit. I don't know if there's a sort of real answer to the question about whether it's a humanities or a social science. Some people talk about logic as if it's the science of reasoning. Like, I would define it as the science of reasoning. Does that make it part of science? I don't know. It's certainly not part of natural science.
No, definitely not.
Right? Like, I don't go and figure out how people reason. I study reason.
Yeah, you're not doing a survey on how people think.
Yeah, well, if I did a survey, you'd get a lot of invalid arguments.
Oh, I'm sure it'd be about 95%. that might be optimistic.
Yeah.
All right, so now we'll move more on to specifically your research papers.
Sure, yeah.
So I'll just summarize quickly one of Tyler's papers from 2022, which was titled Higher Level Constructive Neutral Evolution. And it looks at a theory in evolutionary biology, which is called Constructive Neutral Evolution, or CNE, which I'll refer to as that. Normally, when people think of evolution, we touched on it a bit before, they think of competition and survival of the fittest and natural selection, which drives the best species or best organism to become better and survive. CNE says something different to this intuition, that complexity can evolve on accident through neutral processes and things that don't make an organism fitter, but sort of stick around and build on each other over time, and you have these weird abnormalities. What Tyler does in this paper is push this idea further by applying the rules of the CNE to complexities across the entire biological hierarchy, which includes multicellular organisms, large-scale ecological relations, and even human culture and technology. So tell us a little bit about what you do in this paper. I know it's quite a while back, but...
Well, that was a little bit about what I do in the paper. So I can give a little bit more background, I think. So constructive neutral evolution was a theory named by a person by the name of Arlen Stoltzfus, who wrote the first paper on constructive neutral evolution and a few things on its sense. It's been kind of taken up largely within molecular biology, so it's a more popular theory within molecular biology. And I think I was sort of one of the first philosophers of biology to kind of do anything about it and work on it. So that's how it sort of entered my consciousness. Ford Doolittle, who was my mentor at the time, suggested we write some things about constructive neutral evolution together. And we did, but later I kept thinking, This isn't really unique to molecular biology. It's a phenomenon that applies kind of at multiple levels of the biological hierarchy. So in that paper, I was just trying to provide some examples of showing how it could apply in other places. So probably what I should do is give a kind of little example of what constructive neutral evolution can do. So the classic molecular case works like this. You have two proteins, and you don't know anything about them. Maybe they're both functional, maybe they both do something, maybe they don't. But they kind of accidentally stick together all the time. Every time a new organism is born, every time these things are made, they accidentally stick together. Now, if they accidentally stick together, what can happen is that one can mutate, such that the other one just kind of compensates for this mutation. Sort of like you imagine that joke about the box, where if you turn the box on, a hand comes out of the box and turns the box off. It's sort of like that. You've got a mutation, and the other thing just kind of turns it off. So now you're in a position where, okay, so say A has the mutation and B just kind of turns it off. Well, now if you lose B, there's nothing there to turn off that mutation, and A might do something bad. It might cause damage or something in the cell. So you've gone from a position in which at first you could lose B, because A was fine, to a position where now you're stuck with A and B together. You have to have both. And that can happen. It happens all the time. So you can get situations where complexity in terms of like binding between proteins goes up, or at least the essential bits of it go up, the parts that you can't get rid of. That kind of grows over time. But it didn't get any better. Like the story I told didn't involve saying, oh yeah, that mutation, it improves the function of A, it makes A so much better.
No.
It didn't involve me saying, it makes B so much better. It didn't involve me saying A plus B is very good. It involved none of that. So I told this sort of story about how complexity could increase, but I didn't mention any benefits. And then I just kind of got interested in other cases, other kind of interesting cases. It often works like you have one thing, and then you have some other thing that compensates for it or suppresses it. And then after that, they kind of get stuck together. Should I give you another example?
Yeah, let's go with some examples. That'd be great.
Yeah, so one of the interesting examples for me is the evolution of the liver. So the liver does a remarkable amount of stuff. It helps you process fat, it helps you process vitamins and minerals, it helps regulate various bodily hormones, it does all kinds of stuff. Now, here's a fact. Not every organism has a liver. Okay, so not every large-bodied organism seems to need one. Starfish, for instance, echinoderms in general, don't have a liver. So why do some things have a liver and some things not have a liver? If the liver does so many of these extremely valuable, important stuff? Well, it seems that the story is kind of like this. In our sort of fish ancestry, long ago, sorry, you're going to need to accept that one of your ancestors is fish. There was like an external egg yolk sac that was produced. And that yolk sac eventually kind of got internalized over time and became the liver. Why did it become the liver is the question. Well, the CNE story works like this. Your body all bodily cells can do some of the things that the liver does. Like for instance, they can process fat. So say a lot of the body is processing fat, and then suddenly some part of the cells, something loses the ability to process that fat. Well, if the yolk sac from our fish ancestor is still around, it can do that. So it kind of takes over the job. And then, so you get stuck with this thing. You need it to do some extra job that isn't being done somewhere else anymore. And so it's just a loss of something else. And it starts to just accumulate all these functions from different parts of the body. And then eventually it starts doing all these functions. So surely it's not totally like that. Sometimes the liver is under selection for improvement. Like you can see when people have liver disease, right? Liver disease is fatal. So sometimes there's going to be positive selection for improved livers, but sometimes I think it's just loss of function elsewhere. The liver's just kind of picking up functions from other things. So that's an example.
That's really fascinating. So that just got me thinking now. I'm just wondering about what more functions we have like that, where I had no idea they were kind of just useless in the beginning. It's kind of funny to think back.
Well, it's not so much that they're useless. It's more It's more that the process that makes them more complex is not one that makes them more adaptive.
Okay, right.
So processing fat is a thing that we all need to do. We all need to process fats in order to keep our bodies alive. Now, where should you do that? Should you do it in every cell in the body or specialized in some particular organ? The kind of explanation I'm giving is one that just says, moving all of those functions into the liver, that complex arrangement, that wasn't adaptive, at least maybe not initially.
Yeah.
It's not useless.
Yeah, it's adaptive. Yeah, it's not adaptive at first, became complex because of the things we needed. I mean, like, I'm just, for some reason, I don't even know if this is related, just thinking about how just something I read recently, that camels in Arabia are much thinner than camels in North America or elsewhere because all of their fat storage is almost singularly in their one hump, and they completely metabolize fat from that singular hump. And it started because I posted a video of me on a camel in Egypt, and someone commented, "Why is that camel so thin?" I was like, "It's a good question." just making me think about that. And I guess there's a bunch of things like that in nature. So I'm back to bring it back to a bit more topical. Are you treating the C&E as a biological model or as a more general metaphysical pattern, almost a philosophy of how complexity arises in the world? Or is it more just strictly scientific?
Yeah, so it started out as a scientific theory. I think in the paper somewhere I say it's a kind of general explanatory strategy. I wouldn't say it's a sort of metaphysical structure. It's a way that things sometimes unfold. The classic example that I think people are sort of familiar with and also relates to the modern phenomenon of AI is de-skilling and things like spell check. So in the C&E narrative, you have one thing that kind of like takes over the functions of something else and then allows this thing to become dependent on it. So when spell check started to emerge, people became worse spellers over time. And now we're in this more complex situation where you need a spell check assister in order to be able to spell anything sometimes, right? Like there's no way I could type something on my phone and walk at the same time and have it come out spelled properly unless I have spell check. And there's no way I could type things as fast as I do without, Command Tab and spell check. But then you get kind of stuck in this position. So it's the same general phenomena. There's a suppressor that suppresses some change. That change results in sort of the worsening of the activity of something unless the suppressor is there, which means you're stuck together with the suppressor. So it's a general explanatory strategy or pattern.
Yeah. So do you see that sort of happening with AI now? I mean, even with spell check, now we don't just have regular spell check, we need an AI spell check, like Grammarly, which takes it a step further and it just does it all for you. And it makes the sentences seem better. I mean, at some point we're going to become worse writers, we're going to become way worse at maths because we all use a bunch of, well, not we, people use it for their maths work and all that stuff. I can use it for maths sometimes. So my worry is that, if you're using it to do something that you couldn't yourself verify, then you're using it wrong. Yeah. Because you're probably not getting de-skilled with respect to English spelling is kind of, too bad. Too bad, yeah.
English spelling wasn't perfect anyways. And if everyone sort of mutates a little bit to forget whether their I's go after their E's, I don't really care. But I do care if people start to become lazy in their thinking, right? Like you don't want something to take over the job of thinking for you. So once it takes over the job of thinking, it kind of suppresses your ability. It suppresses the loss of your ability to think for yourself. Like even if it's just making lists for you, even if it's just making tables, even if it's just setting a schedule or making a plan, it's kind of depriving you, if you couldn't do those things yourself already, it's depriving you of an opportunity to learn to make a schedule or to make a plan or to make a list. So I would suggest, given that general explanatory pattern, you don't want to neutrally evolve into a position where you're dependent on technology.
Well, I could see it very much happening that way just from the discussions I've had with many people. So AI is a big topic of interest for me, and I guess we're going into that now, and I guess it's topical, so it's good. And I was speaking to my great aunt, she's the Dean of Engineering at the University of Ottawa in Canada, so she lives in Canada as well. So we were having, obviously she's an engineer and I do philosophy, so we have different opinions on things. I spoke a bit about AI online on Facebook because I just saw a lot of my grandparents using it a bit too much. I was like, hey guys, just some information you might want to learn about the MIT study on brain atrophy. I thought that was interesting. Some AI-induced psychosis. And she asked me, well, since we have to accept AI as a new technology, like a printer or a calculator or something, even though it's quite different, how can we encourage good use of AI? The reason I'm asking that is because you mentioned you should use it if you're using it for things you couldn't do yourself and can't verify, then you're using it wrong. What's the right way to use AI?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're going to use it to do things like mathematics or logic for you, then you should use it to save time, but not to save effort, right? If you're going to use it, you should be able to check the result. If it gives you an answer that you can't check, then don't use it anymore. Go and figure out what you need to learn such that you'll be able to check whether its response is correct. So I think that's just about responsible use and not making yourself worse at the task. There's so many other things to say about ethical use.
Yeah, there's a lot.
But just on the particular problem of like making sure that it doesn't make you worse at thinking, then responsible use entails knowing precisely how to use the tool to achieve something that effectively saves time, right? I think that's a good use for it, but you don't want it to substitute for the creative process.
No, you don't. I mean, like, because if you're getting it to, let's say I use it to do some very advanced logic for my essay, and I don't even understand what it says. Like, yeah, that looks about right. I'm gonna put that there, sounds smart. That's just taking away all the effort of learning it. If I can't do it, then I shouldn't use it for that. But I think it is kind of like opening Pandora's box, because I think if you give someone the tools like, this can get me a first, I'm gonna start using this to make my arguments sound impenetrable, make me sound like the best analytic philosopher in the history of the world. I feel like every time I look around the library, someone's got an AI tab open, whether it's NotebookLM, or it's ChatGPT, or it's DeepSeek, or it's Claude. People are using AI. That's just the fact of the matter. I think a lot of people feel mellow about it, but at some point we have to try and figure out ways to actually encourage good usage, because I think accepting it as part of it is just part of adapting to it, you know?
Well, I mean, the slightly darker thing to say about it is probably that what all those people are doing is devaluing the education that you
It really is.
So if all those people can get firsts and they can all use AI to achieve various goals they have career-wise, and they get into those careers and then they can't perform.
Exactly.
Then that casts shadow of doubt on everyone from the generation that uses them. So there's some worry there.
Yeah.
I think the best thing you can do for yourself is to prove to yourself that, I was talking to Tom Roberts here about this at one point, to prove to yourself that you're kind of classically trained.
Yeah.
Right? That you can handwrite your notes, that you can go to the library, that you can read non-digital text, that you can summarize information on your own. When it comes to logic, that you can write out the proofs yourself. And once you can confirm all that to yourself, then your duty to yourself is done. But you can't really prevent other people from slowly devaluing the institution of education by using a machine to answer questions for them.
No, you can't.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we can't catch it all either.
No.
You know, at first it was quite obvious, and now I think it's becoming less obvious. I think that for some people, they think that means it's a better tool, but I don't think that it means that.
No, I don't think it means that. I think it's just that actually the people, because we have to acknowledge that they're made by companies which want money, they have programmed them in a way to make it less detectable. Doesn't mean it's better or it's a better piece of work. It's just they've removed the obvious signs that it's generated. And even so, like, I mean, if this might reassure you, is obviously the advantage of being a student. Is I know people who use AI in their work, and honestly, whenever I read it, I can tell, and I'm like, this isn't good. Like, I've read so many essays where I'm like, you don't define this, you don't define that. This is just, you've repeated the same point here, and the marks don't. I actually haven't seen someone get a first from just using AI.
Oh,
that
yeah.
makes you feel
better. I mean, you
Yeah.
can still often tell.
Yeah.
When people simply try to use whatever AI says about some topic as their output, and they haven't pre-trained it themselves, they didn't feed it in the relevant text, they didn't like work with the text afterwards to modify and change it, then it's usually quite bad.
Yeah.
So you just fail. Those things just fail.
Yeah.
Rather than getting sent off for AI validation.
So at least there's ways, but who knows, maybe in 5 years we won't even be able to tell. But yeah.
Maybe. I think maybe in 5 years you won't be able to bring your computer into class and you'll be doing your essays and you'll be writing your essays in a cold, dark room with a tinfoil hat or
honestly, that's possible. That's possible. I'm surprised we're not doing that more. I was like, because obviously my sister, she goes to Cambridge, so she handwrites her exams now. So they don't have any types. I think they used to some modules, but now everything's handwritten, timed, in person for all the exams. You're handwriting, and I'm like, it's only a matter of time now. Where everyone else starts doing.
That's what we're all going to do.
Yeah. Would you want to do that for your classes?
Yeah.
You could, flick a finger, metaphysics for all of them now writing. That's the way to do it.
I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen this year.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's an in-person exam, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. You'll be able to tell who got away with the essay using AI and who actually maintained it. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'll be able to tell how bad I am at reading handwriting.
It'll be rough. I mean, yeah, it'll be interesting. But how do you see AI impacting, since we're on the philosophy of science and philosophy, we'll talk about impacting philosophy and scientific research. How do you see it changing that? I mean, are scientists using AI? Are philosophers using AI? I know there is
everybody's using it.
There is a lecturer here who's quite optimistic about it. Some people have different opinions.
I mean, despite sort of fear-mongering that I might say about how it will de-skill people, I'm still relatively optimistic about its potential use as an intellectual tool. It's just that you need to be properly trained before you should use that tool.
Yeah.
I think there's genuine possibility for positive outcomes. I sometimes use AI to check proofs for me. So I'll write a proof and get it to check the proof. And it's pretty good at catching errors.
Is it? Okay.
I sometimes use it to generate a set of proofs for me to check, because it's much easier to check a proof than it is to write one. So I sometimes use it for those things. It's quite a good sort of exploratory tool. It's not really good at generating things to give to other people, because it generates things that are too specific to the way that you're interacting with it. And often, just not very creative, not worth sharing. But I think it's an extremely useful exploratory tool for humanists. For scientists, I think it's far more diagnostic. Like, they're using it to classify, arrange, order data in ways that before would have taken a lot of statistical sophistication. And that's a bit sad for the statisticians. But I think they'll still have work to do.
I hope.
They'll still have work. So I see the possible upsides as being finding new ways to classify data for scientists, especially classification tasks. And of course, there are a number of downsides, right? Like, especially disenfranchisement of people. Like I mentioned it somewhat as a joke, the disenfranchisement of statisticians. But I think it's far more likely that a lot of technician work in the sciences would be disenfranchised by people using AI. The reason I ended up getting a degree in biochemistry or in computational biology was because when I was doing that, it was kind of in vogue. We needed all these computational biologists, and so there's all this money to fund computational biology degrees. I'm thankful that happened, but I think now there's less of that because a lot of people are using AI tools to do bioinformatics, and they're thinking, maybe I don't need as many people writing code. So there's disenfranchisement, which is a real problem. That's sort of more of an economic or Marxist problem.
It's a bit of AI. I mean, that is same thing at Lucy's talk on AI. She said that was her biggest problem. She wasn't going to bother with, I don't know if you were there for that bit of it. But she wasn't going to bother with the existential risks of it, but rather the socioeconomic risks of the fact that it's really, and when you say diminishing education, bring it to like a more narrow perspective of people like studying here, right? If you're using AI and you're doing a degree like philosophy, which like honestly, it's not controversial to say that we're not doing this for money, right? We're not doing this to get loaded. You're doing it for the experience of learning. It's quite paradoxical to me to then use a tool to take that away. I mean, I like your point about using it once you've learned, because I don't use AI much at all. So sometimes I'll use it just for fun, really to mess around with my friends. I've never used it to write a paper or anything like that.
It's good for writing a funny story.
Yeah, it's just good for messing around, to be honest. Sometimes I'll be bored and I'll debate an AI on guard. I'll just be like, all right, that's fun, that was all right. It's interesting just to see what it says and toy around with it. But when it comes to actually doing the work for me, I haven't touched it. But I suppose maybe if I'm at the PhD level or something, maybe I'll know enough to actually be able to use it without it taking away, and it might actually be useful for research. I mean, right now I actually kind of enjoy the nitty-gritty of like reading papers, and I have all these highlighters and stuff. It's actually kind of fun.
Good. Sure.
It's hard work, but I feel like it's worth it. But maybe one day.
If you didn't enjoy that stuff, I don't know why you'd do philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, if you don't want to sit down and read I mean, like, it was that one paper on vagueness which you gave us, which was 4 pages long, and I was laughing. I was like, you said something which was like, it shows that a paper isn't determined on how hard it is by how long it is. It was very short and dense. I think that paper took me like an hour or something to actually get my head around.
I think Evans is 1 page. And Lewis is 2.
Lewis is 2 pages, Evans is 1 page.
3 pages total.
And this took me hours. It took me actual.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
But I remember opening it and just going, yeah. I mean, part of that, I mean, if you use AI to summarize, I mean, you're only getting one interpretation of it when you can have your own interpretations and issues with it. I mean, that's the issue with summaries and intellectuals in general in academia, is like one interpretation of a text. It's not very useful. And B, you're missing out on the actual process of learning. But it is just like, I guess, one of those things you give someone £10,000, they're going to spend it. They're not going to throw it away. And I think a lot of people found this easy way out, and there's not much we can do about it except put them in cold, dark rooms.
We can force people to, even if they use AI in private, to be able to not use AI
and replicate it in public. But I think that's a good point to jump off AI and get back to the topic. I'll ask a couple questions on the philosophy of science, then we'll get to metaphysics. I think I was talking about like a general issue of explanation about philosophers of science often talk about whether specific theories complete or complement each other. And you argue that natural, as you said before, natural selection and the neutral evolution, they're not enemies, but describe different explanatory levels and different factors in the same overall problems, if that makes sense. Do you think that this shows something deep about how we explain things in science, that sometimes two seemingly opposing theories can both be right, just at different levels of description? Because it's not true that just because two things explain things differently means that they're contradictory.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to say more about that.
Yeah, that's all I really had there. Do you think that, I was asking more, I guess it's a bit more epistemology, right? About when you have a general theory, like so you had Darwin, and you say the neutral evolution is a different explanation. Yeah.
Right, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so I don't think that they're in contradiction with each other. Now, if someone were to say, of the very same trait, that some of this trait should be explained by C&E, and some of it should be explained by normal adaptive Darwinian selection, I would say yes. Sure.
Yeah, so different levels, but yeah.
Well, it's not so much the levels, it's like, for instance, the liver. Clearly the liver is also adapted in various ways. Like, it has to fit in just the right place. It has to not get damaged when you move around. It has to metabolize things at a certain efficiency. All these things are under selection, positive selection. But then features of the liver, like the co-location of all the functions, I think that's probably maybe not initially under selection. So there's just different features of the thing we're explaining. Sometimes we use natural selection, we explain them one way. Sometimes we use C&E, we explain them another way. So there's no real contradiction there. That contradiction is not that the explanations are happening at different levels, it's that the explanations are targeting different features of that system. But that happens quite a lot in science, right? There's a famous quote by Gould and Lewontin where they say, you know, you don't declare your rival impossible in theory. Right? You don't say your rival theory is impossible in theory. You just sort of narrowly circumscribe its domain of action so that it seems like it's not very important. But you don't say it's impossible, especially not in science.
No, you sort of demonstrate why this one makes more sense than that one.
Yeah, or you try to make theirs seem like it has less application.
Less application, and this one's more important.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. But we'll move on to metaphysics now and try. It's a lot of questions, but we'll try and get it done in good time. I mean, this is the real interesting thing to me. I love metaphysics. I'm excited for this. I mean, I don't want to disparage anyone when I give this example to tie on this question, but when people think of metaphysics, they think of like old-timey theologians or spirituality. Well, can you tell us more about what metaphysics is actually about in contemporary philosophy and what the core issues are right now? I mean, just to give a funny story, I mean, I was at the Philosophy Society event, we did a pub crawl, and I asked one of the people there who their favorite philosophers were, and they told me Thomas Aquinas, and I found that answer kind of random. I was like, why? I was like, his metaphysics. I was like, yeah, so I think there's a lot more new things we could discuss, right?
Yeah. I mean, as I sort of, there's definitely a thing called new metaphysics, right? So new metaphysics, it's less concerned with theological questions. It's more separate from theological questions. It's more completely engaged in the linguistic terms. So it's largely concerned we're often concerned with issues about the relationship between language and the world. And it's somewhat scientistic in a sense, that it often takes its problems or motivation for its problems from science. So that's a kind of big change, right? Those things didn't even really exist in ancient metaphysics. So they might have still debated the nature of being and time and possibility, but they didn't do so after the linguistic turn. They didn't do so trying to keep the idea of God out of your mind, etc. So yeah, there's a sort of new school of metaphysics that's quite different from these things. I'm not sure what more I should...
What is metaphysics now, and what are the main problems it's studying?
So I can say a little bit more about maybe some of the main problems. Well, maybe I would be better off talking about some of the main problems, some of the things that are kind of within my area that I think are main problems. Yeah, so I work in an area of metaphysics that, at least sometimes I work in an area that's called sort of fundamental ontology. Fundamental ontology asks questions about what the sort of basic, simple constituents of reality are. Like, what really is there in the world? What are the things that there are in the world? So the oldest answer to this question is atomism. The world consists of nothing but atoms in the void. And that question is somewhat satisfying, but somewhat dissatisfying, especially given modern science. We know that you can split and break atoms. You can break them up into smaller and smaller bits. And so the way a physicist might answer the question, what are the most fundamental things, would be asking about, like, what are the smallest things in the world? Like, what are the tiniest things? But that's not quite what fundamental ontology is about. Fundamental ontology is about what kind of things do I need to say that there are in the world such that I can organize all of my experience of the world around those things. So one kind of answer is to say that the world consists of universals that are instantiated. There's things like redness, blueness, softness, hardness, etc. And we have these kind of universal concepts, and they get kind of instantiated and become particulars. That's one view. Another view is kind of similar to that, which is called trope theory. It says the world consists of a set of tropes. These are kind of like individualized universals in a sense. They're like almost like combining something that's both concrete and a universal. So it'll be like the roughness of this paper will be some trope. The blackness of this thing will be some other trope. And you can see the world as being just a sort of collection of these basic tropes. In scientific metaphysics, we might have questions about, like, what are the fundamental sort of constituents of reality that we need to talk about when we're talking about, say, a biological entity? Do we need to talk about mechanisms, for instance? And what are mechanisms? So a lot of modern metaphysics and science has been dealing with the question of what mechanisms are and how those work. And here at Exeter, some of the work, largely begun by John Dupre and some of his collaborators, has been sort of moving away from a mechanistic picture of the world towards one that's more based on processes. Some of this goes all the way back to ancient philosophy in Heraclitus, but some of it's more modern. So some of the work that I've done here when I was a postdoc here was on process ontology. Or being able to look at the world as being a collection of processes instead of a collection of things or of mechanisms.
Can we quickly distinguish the difference between a process and a mechanism for viewers?
I don't know if it can be done quickly, but we can try. So a mechanism is sort of defined as a collection of entities, or you might say objects or things, together with the activities that those entities do that are organized in a certain way, such that that organization of those activities produces some phenomenon. A process is not defined on the basis of a collection of objects or entities. Right? A process doesn't need to have special identifiable objects. So though a biologist might say there's something like the mechanism of sugar metabolism, then they'll say, you know, you've got this molecule and that one and this protein and that one. They'll name these objects. Then they'll talk about the activities of those objects or their properties. And they'll say how they're organized to produce the phenomena that we see of sugar metabolism. A process ontologist isn't going to necessarily break that flow of the phenomena that we see as sugar metabolism up necessarily into these discrete parts. They're going to think about processes of creation of proteins. They're going to talk about processes of degradation and production. And there's a kind of open question, I think, about whether or not these two frameworks are ultimately the same. And that's what I came here to work on when I was a postdoc.
Okay. Well, okay. Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. I would want to ask just out of curiosity now, because there's obviously there's this naturalized metaphysics, which is very much involved with the philosophy of science. And then there's the general metaphysics with the logic and language time you're talking about. How much those two play into each other, and how separate are they? Because when I think of like what we did in class, we're going to talk about now, like possible worlds, doesn't seem much related to any specific scientific theories.
Yeah, so the metaphysics of modality is not usually particularly related to scientific theories.
It's quite logical, right?
It often involves logic, although that's not quite true. Like, for instance, if you're doing computer science, you might not call the things that you work with worlds. Like I said, there was that sort of joke from Peter Scotch. If you don't like possible worlds and you don't like talking about possible worlds, then just call them semantic indices.
Semantic indices.
All that matters is that we talk about these sets of things relative to which we can make these kind of modal claims. That kind of reasoning, just talking about sets of things relative to which one can make modal claims, that happens throughout computer science and throughout other areas of sciences as well. They just might not call them possible worlds. When we're, doing what's sometimes called like high church metaphysics, and we're just thinking about the pure nature of modality itself, we'll talk about them and call them possible worlds. So sometimes they're separate. I don't think that they're in general particularly separate. There's a lot of crossover between different areas of metaphysics. I think for a lot of people, process ontology comes from Whiteheadian philosophy of cosmology. And he was quite interested in like analyzing and understanding God as a process. So you find a lot of theological process ontologists. You find process ontologists of science. So I think there's a lot of smear, a lot of connection between these two areas of metaphysics. But obviously people specialize.
Yeah, specialize in their own domains, and even more specific within said domains than all there's so many things under philosophy. I think that's what confuses a lot of people. It's like there's so many different areas, like what possibly unites them all?
Well, I think that what unites them all is that they're all normative.
They're all normative, exactly.
They're all interested in value, and not necessarily moral value, but value judgments and normative judgments. How should I reason? How should I think? How should I feel? How should I act?
Well, I've asked almost every single person or like departmental figure here that exact question, and I have to say I think that's the most succinct answer I got. It makes the most sense. That's actually something what I was thinking was more that they're all arguing these normative things about the things we can't answer with empiricism, that like it crosses into so many different domains, and that's how I'm going to go on a tangent. But that's the main thing I would say is uniting philosophy for everyone who's like confused at that. So I want to talk a bit more about possible worlds, and I want to talk about your theory, categorical modal realism.
Sure.
But I want to get into that, but I also think you do a better job at explaining possible worlds more succinctly than I would. So just, do you want to give like a bit of context on Lewis and the entire theory of sets, and then we can get into that.
Okay. Let me try. So
I can try if you want.
Well, no, I'll try. The idea behind possible worlds theory is this. We make modal claims all the time. We make claims about what's possible, what's actual, what's contingent, what's probable, what could have been the case, what would have been the case, what shouldn't have been the case, what might have been the case, what can be, what can't be, etc. So we use this language to talk all the time. We say things like, I could have fallen in love with him, but I didn't. Or I could have crashed my car the other day, but I didn't, etc. Right? So we have possibility-like claims throughout our language, and we say them all the time. What makes that stuff true, if it is true? Now, some people are necessitarians. They think that that language, whenever you have a could statement, it's just always false. So when I almost trip walking into my house, and I think, oh, I could have just tripped there and fallen on my face, that statement is just false.
Because you didn't trip.
Because I didn't. Those people are necessitarians. If you're not a necessitarian, you need to find some way to make sense of how statements about things that didn't happen can be true. Like, how do I make a statement true of the form, I would have gone to the party, but I didn't. Or I could have been there last night, but I missed my bus. Right? In order to do that, one way that we do this in metaphysics is to talk about possible worlds. So these are kind of like universes or dimensions in the common sense. In the common vernacular, you might say universe or dimension. We call them worlds. And we say things like there are many different worlds and there's many different ways that things happen in different worlds. And possibility claims can be made true by talking about what happens in possible worlds. So in a sense, I could have tripped on the way into my house, even if I didn't trip, because there's a possible world where I tripped.
In which it happened and you
yeah. And that possible world's kind of related to ours in the right way. It's kind of similar to ours in the right way, such that what happens in that world is what could happen in this world.
So everything that could happen in these possible worlds were technically possible here.
Well, not all of them, but some of them are kind of related to our world.
Yeah. So in a world where it's just barren and nothing.
You might say if there's a world that, you know, has the same physical laws as ours or something, but it's just barren nothingness.
Yeah, same physical laws, except just we had a massive nuclear bomb go off and...
Yeah, maybe that's why we can't talk to aliens, right? Yeah. Because in most possible worlds, maybe we just, as soon as we invent nuclear technology, we just destroy ourselves.
Yeah, maybe that's one.
And that's one thing. That's what it might mean to say that we could have destroyed ourselves with nuclear technology.
Yeah.
That there's a possible world where we did so.
Cuban Missile Crisis could have ended badly, and that's a possible world where it happened, right? Yeah.
Well, it sort of did end badly.
Yeah, well, worse, I guess. Yeah. I mean, what you're trying to do in your paper is replacing Lewis's theory of possible worlds, where he sets them in sets of possible worlds, where they're all sort of statically equal and disconnected, and they exist in sets. You argue that they should be better formulated in categories, taking category theory from, I think it was from pure mathematics, wasn't it? And you replace the static world with something, taking category of a world which is defined by relationships and transformations, indicated by arrows that preserve the structure of the worlds. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. So one way of conceiving of how these possible worlds are is that they just exist in this kind of big space. That space is called the plurality of worlds. So in the plurality of worlds, you have a bunch of worlds. And on Lewis's account, the kind of standard account of modal semantics or modal realism, those worlds are just all disconnected from each other, totally isolated. And they exist in some big set that has some very large size. What I tried to do, again, partially just because it's sort of in vogue and partially because categories independently is sort of an area of mathematics where I work and I think it's interesting, is just kind of take this picture that's based on a set of worlds and instead base it on a category of worlds. So what makes the difference between a category and a set is that in a set, you're just thinking about elements of the thing. There's just worlds in there. But in a category, you also have to account for the transformations of those things. So I'm asking people to consider not just worlds, but how worlds might be transformed into other ones. And I think that provides, I don't want to say it's a better way to think about our modal metaphysics, but it provides one that's kind of at least as good. If we can talk about transformations of worlds, there's some things we can say using that language that are at least very hard to say in the set theoretic case.
Do you have any examples of that?
Well, yeah, I have one example that I sort of return to every once in a while. So within a world, we often talk about certain processes or transformations. You can see maybe some of the process philosophy has spilled over into my modal metaphysics. We talk about certain transformations. So for instance, the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly. And when I look at a caterpillar, I might say something like, it could fly. And what I mean by that is it could metamorphose into a butterfly. But I can also look at a particular metamorphosis. I can watch metamorphosis happen and say, you know, this could have happened with less sugar. Yeah. Right? Caterpillars need a lot of sugar. And I think, this could have happened with less sugar. Maybe the caterpillar could have evolved to just eat fat or to eat less sugar. But what kind of transformation am I talking about there? It's not something that's happening in this world because you don't have one metamorphosis transforming into another metamorphosis. But if you can talk about transformations of worlds, I can say, yeah, our world could have transformed into one where caterpillars undergo metamorphosis by some different means.
Yeah, or pens become papers or something like that.
Well, it would depend on what kind of things you want to be preserved by that transformation. What's going to count as a good transformation?
Yeah.
And I think maybe a whole shift of the world history such that caterpillars evolved in a different way. That's not something that really occurs within a world. That's sort of like a transformation of worlds, a relationship between worlds. And I think including those things in our metaphysics makes it easier to talk about that kind of thing, a transformation of worlds.
Okay, so would you say Lewis's version of modal realism has that problem of size and isolation, where you've got all of these worlds and they're all equal and they're all isolated, and there's an infinite disconnected multiverse of worlds? I mean, because when you say infinity, like intuitively, I'm not imagining like a box, this space with all these worlds. I'm seeing it just completely expanding. Would you say that using categories instead of sets helps with that theory? Does it give us a more unified or, like, I guess, more metaphysically economical way to think of possible worlds? Seeing them as categories rather than just this.
So I will try to give you the answer, but unfortunately I can't give this answer in any immediately comprehensible way, but I will try to give the answer. So what Lewis says is that there's Beth2 worlds.
This is a funny answer there.
There are Beth2 worlds because roughly we assume at least that our world is continuous. So that's the size of Beth1. And every kind of rearrangement of our world, at least, is a world. And if our world's continuous, which means in terms of the number of things in it, the particles in it, the size of it, that's Beth2. Sorry, that's Beth1. Then all those rearrangements, that involves taking every function from our universe and kind of continuously deforming it. And that's of size Beth2. So that's what Lewis says. That's great. But then he suffers from the paradox of size, the Forrest-Armstrong paradox, which just says something like this. If you can take worlds and you can combine them into larger worlds, if you can do that, then you end up with worlds that are kind of paradoxically too large. So in set theory, what you would ordinarily do is just say, okay, well, there's just a class of worlds then. And Lewis chooses not to do that. Instead, Lewis gives an answer that's more metaphysically providing a kind of constraint on the way that you can put worlds together. But there's another kind of answer more common amongst category theorists. So category theorists don't tend to work with all the sets. Because you get into paradoxes when you try to do things like that. They also don't work with things like all the groups or all the vector spaces or all the topologies. They work with kind of chosen collections of these based on a particular pre-chosen size. That particular chosen size is called a Grothendieck universe. That thing is just a collection of sets or objects of whatever type you like, and some ways of combining these things. So my solution to the problem of size is not to provide a kind of metaphysical proviso on it, but to kind of do what the category theorists do and say, what you need to do first is choose a kind of Grothendieck universe of worlds. This is sort of like a sub-collection of the plurality of worlds. And
so not all of them.
Not all of them, just some of them. And then you choose a way to combine them such that you only get things within there. So you don't kind of move outside of that.
So you stay within that subcategory.
You stay within that Grothendieck universe. But now, if you could take the whole thing and you could combine it into a single world, that would probably give you a world, at least if the things in that universe are small enough. But that thing can't be part of the original universe. But it could be part of a bigger universe. So this is a kind of, it's a trick that kind of makes it work. Right? So instead of providing a kind of metaphysical constraint on how the worlds can be, I'm saying what I'll do is just follow what category theorists do when they need collections of a specific size, and I'll use Grothendieck universes instead. I'm fairly convinced that my solution works. I don't believe that one can only do it in category theory. You could technically have Lewis could have done this.
In sets.
He could have done this in sets too. There's a way to make it work in sets. It's just kind of invisible to you
Yeah.
when you're working with that normal set theoretic
It's
paradigm.
more, it's like, what is it, easier to do with category theory?
Yeah, it's just more obvious to a
obvious.
category theorist that you can do things that way. It's the sort of standard solution in category theory to working with sets of increasingly large size.
Well, but it would have been possible in the sets theory. This is more just like, is that why you say you don't see it as a better way, but just another way of, I think, an equally good way of seeing it?
Yeah, at least as good. I think it's a bit better.
I think it's a bit better too. That's what
but if I was trying to argue about it, I would just say it's at least as good.
And I think you can't really dispute that. I think it is at least as good. Yeah. You also hint about how category theory changes how we think about identity across worlds. In Lewis's picture, I don't literally exist in another world. There isn't another Ahmed, only a counterpart who is sufficiently similar to me who does. But in a categorical model where there are morphisms aping one world to another, does that make trans-world identity more coherent? Is it more like an Ahmed who's transformed, let's say, in another world where we have more transhumanist inventions? I have a silver arm. Is it still me? Or does it change anything?
I mean, well, the answer that I want to give to that is not that it makes trans-world identity more coherent, but just that it provides a different way of looking at what counterparts are. So counterparts are usually defined as entities in some other world that are quite similar to you and the most similar to you in that world. But I want to say that if we can think about transformations of worlds, we can kind of like look at what happens on those transformations. We can sort of pick one object in a world, transform that whole world in a certain way, and kind of see what happens to that object. And if when you do that, if you can imagine doing that, then the thing you get is your counterpart, even if that thing isn't particularly similar to you. So what I'm not trying to do is say, yeah, this is a way to make trans-world identity better, because I think it's still not the identity relationship. It's still not Kripke's view. It's not identity. It's not an identity relationship you get, but it's a kind of functorial relationship. Not only do you need to be kind of sufficiently similar, but you still need to have kind of the right relationships to other things in the world. And that's more like just a different way of picking out counterparts than it is an improvement on trans-world identity.
All right, so I'll leave it. We've done a lot of dense conversations now, so I'll leave it on a more fun one, which I was personally interested in. Yeah, this will be the last one for today. So obviously, a lot of scientific developments and theories are inspired by new data, right? Revelations which are brought on by facts in the first place, and you can sort of dress up and make it nice. But with metaphysics, there is a degree of creativity when you come up with these new theories. How do you come up with them? Is it like through finding logical flaws in different theories, or is there a method you use to theorize about? So does it just kind of click and paste one day and you start thinking about different ideas?
I think I've had both experiences. One paper that I can remember writing was called Local Causation, and it has a kind of similar flavor to some of my other work where I pick some highfalutin bit from mathematics and category theory and I kind of throw it at a standard problem in metaphysics. Except in this case, it was taking sheaf theory, which is a theory of sort of like organized structures that sit on top of topological spaces. And I threw it at causation, the theory of causation. And I feel like I can remember a sort of moment. I can remember the exact moment where I was, what I was doing when I thought, you know what I'll try to do? I'll try to throw sheaves at causal modeling. I'll see if I can get sheaves of causal graphs to work. And if I can get that to work, then I'll try some of these harder cases. And I tried one of them that night. It didn't work. I tried it for the next 6 months. And finally, I kind of got it. So it took a long time to work it out. But I think the initial inspiration was kind of quick. Right? It was just, let me take X and Y and shove them together and see what I get. So that one I can remember being a kind of moment of inspiration. One of those times where philosophers talk about having an intuition and not really knowing where that intuition comes from. I don't know why I was thinking about that. I mean, I was reading about sheaves. I knew some philosophy of causation, so they just got mixed up in the mind and then it seemed to work out. I don't know psychologically if that's a good explanation for what happened. Maybe it was more creative than that. But other times it's more like a workhorse. You know, you're slowly chipping away at something. I have a paper in Adrian Curry's recent collection on Adrian Curry and Sophie Weigel's recent collection on methods in the philosophy of science, where I take this example that I'm stealing from Colin McLarty's treatment of Grothendieck. So this is a tertiary stolen idea. But it's about the ways you crack a nut. One is you just kind of like put a knife against the edge of the nut and you hit hard.
Yeah.
The other is you kind of like find exactly the right angle and then kind of pry it open. And another is that you just kind of leave the nut in a glass of water for like days or weeks, or you leave it on a beach and then eventually it can just open easily.
Yeah.
So sometimes the problems you want to solve are like of the last form, and you just need to really slowly chip away at them.
And just let it,
Yeah, and you apply more and more methods to the same problem. Maybe you're really just interested in getting some kind of solution, and so you just keep working at different ways, like hitting that thing from different angles until finally it opens. And finally you get some kind of thing. And that can be deeply exhausting and frustrating work, but I think if you're interested in the payoff, then it's worth it.